"Ma'am, that truck cannot stay here," the valet said, and for one quiet second, every polished window of the Harrington Grand Hotel seemed to turn into a mirror, showing Rachel Miller exactly what they thought she was. She sat behind the wheel of her father's old blue Ford pickup, her hands still resting on the cracked steering wheel, the engine ticking softly after the 20-mile drive from the edge of town. The truck had a dent above the left headlight, a faded toolbox bolted into the bed, and a small silver cross hanging from the rearview mirror where her father, Henry Miller, had placed it 12 years earlier. To Rachel, it was not junk. It was the last place his hands had touched, the last thing that still smelled faintly of motor oil, pine soap, and the peppermints he used to keep in his shirt pocket. But to the young man in the black valet jacket, and to the guests stepping out of glossy cars behind her, it looked like a mistake. "The service entrance is around back," he added, lowering his voice as if kindness could hide embarrassment. Rachel looked past him at the hotel entrance, where white columns rose 3 stories high and gold lights shone over a red carpet laid out for her cousin Madison Whitaker's engagement party. Women in silk dresses paused near the doors. Men in tailored suits glanced at the pickup, then at Rachel's plain navy dress, her simple flats, and the old leather purse resting on the passenger seat. She could feel their judgment before anyone said a word. It had weight. It had temperature. It settled over her like cold rain. "I am here for the Whitaker engagement dinner," Rachel said calmly. The valet blinked, then checked the guest list clipped to his stand. When he found her name, his expression changed from refusal to confusion, which somehow felt worse. Before he could answer, Madison appeared at the entrance with a champagne-colored shawl draped over her shoulders, smiling beautifully until she saw the truck. The smile froze. Rachel watched her cousin's eyes move from the rust near the wheel well to the hotel guests, pretending not to stare. "Rachel!" Madison called, walking quickly down the steps, each word wrapped in sweetness and warning. "You came in that?" A few people nearby turned their heads. Rachel stepped out of the pickup and closed the door gently, because that was how Henry had taught her to treat old things that had carried you farther than anyone expected. "It still runs fine," she said. Madison laughed softly, not because anything was funny, but because silence would have made her shame too obvious. "Of course it does. I just thought maybe for tonight you would borrow something a little more appropriate." Rachel looked at the hotel, then at the truck, then back at her cousin. In her purse, her phone buzzed once with a new message from the bank, but she did not reach for it yet. She only smiled politely, handed the valet her keys, and said, "Please be careful with it. It means more to me than anything parked here." Madison moved closer to Rachel with the kind of smile people used when they wanted everyone nearby to believe nothing unpleasant was happening. "I am just saying, tonight is important," she whispered, though her eyes kept flicking toward the old Ford as if it were a stain spreading across the hotel driveway. "Bradley's parents are here. Investors are here. The photographer is here. You know how people talk." Rachel knew exactly how people talked because Madison had been letting them do it since they were teenagers. When Rachel was 16 and showed up to homecoming in a dress her mother had altered by hand, Madison had called it vintage in front of the popular girls, then laughed about it in the bathroom. When Rachel worked weekends at Henry Miller's repair garage instead of joining ski trips or shopping weekends, the family said she had inherited her father's small-town habits. They said it softly at Thanksgiving tables, over coffee, beside Christmas trees, always with polite voices and sharp edges. Henry had never answered them. He would simply wipe his hands on a clean rag, open the truck door for Rachel, and tell her, "A person who needs shiny things to feel tall is standing on something weak." Rachel had not understood that sentence when she was young. Standing outside the Harrington Grand Hotel, watching Madison try to decide where to put her so she would damage the picture as little as possible, Rachel understood it perfectly. "Where would you like me to go?" Rachel asked. Madison looked relieved, as if Rachel had finally accepted the role assigned to her. "There is a side entrance near the garden room. It is still beautiful, just less crowded. You can slip in that way, and nobody has to make a big deal out of anything." Rachel glanced at the front doors behind Madison, where guests were being welcomed by name, photographed under gold lights, and guided toward the ballroom with glasses of sparkling cider and champagne. Then she looked up the side walkway Madison had pointed to, a narrow path beside the service wall where catering carts rolled past stacked linen bags. "So I am invited," Rachel said gently, "but not meant to be seen arriving." Madison's cheeks tightened. "Please do not turn this into something emotional. I am trying to protect you from feeling uncomfortable." That was the part Rachel almost smiled at. Madison had always believed humiliation sounded better when called protection. Before Rachel could answer, Aunt Patricia stepped out of the hotel, wearing pearls and a pale blue dress that looked expensive enough to pay a month of Rachel's old rent. She stopped beside Madison and gave Rachel a quick look from shoes to hair. "Oh, honey," Patricia said, drawing out the words like syrup over broken glass. "You made it. I was not sure you would be able to come all this way." The hotel was 20 miles from Rachel's house. Patricia made it sound like a pilgrimage. Rachel nodded politely. "The drive was fine." "In Henry's truck?" Patricia asked, looking past her. "My goodness. He loved that thing, did he not? Your father never could let go of anything once it had sentimental value." Rachel felt the sentence land exactly where Patricia intended it. Not on the truck, but on Henry. On the man who had fixed neighbors' cars after closing time, who had worn the same brown work jacket for years, who had eaten peanut butter sandwiches at his desk because he said time mattered more than fancy lunches. To the family, Henry had been useful when their cars made strange noises and invisible when the room filled with wealthier men. "He knew what was worth keeping," Rachel said. Patricia gave a small laugh. "Well, tonight is Madison's night, so let us keep everything pleasant." Madison reached for Rachel's arm, not warmly, but like someone guiding a misplaced item back onto a shelf. Rachel did not pull away. She allowed herself to be led around the side of the hotel, past the clipped hedges and the delivery door, while guests at the front entrance continued stepping into light. In her purse, her phone buzzed again, then a third time. Rachel could feel it against her side, a small, steady pulse from a world none of them had bothered to imagine. But she did not check it yet. She followed Madison through the side entrance with Henry's truck keys in her hand, holding them so tightly the old brass edge pressed into her palm. Rachel stepped into the garden room through the side entrance, and the first thing she noticed was not the chandeliers or the tall windows or the polished marble floor. It was the way conversation changed shape when she entered. It did not stop completely. It softened, thinned, and bent around her, the way people lower their voices when they do not want to admit they were talking about you. Madison walked 2 steps ahead, smiling at every guest as if she had personally arranged the lighting, the flowers, and the weather outside. Rachel followed with her shoulders straight, Henry's truck keys still warm in her palm, while servers moved past with silver trays and distant piano music floated from the ballroom. The garden room was only a waiting space before dinner, but Madison had filled it with white roses, gold-framed photographs, and small tables where guests could sip drinks beneath twinkling lights. Everything was tasteful, expensive, and designed to be seen. Rachel found a quiet place near a tall potted ficus, close enough to belong but far enough away not to disturb Madison's perfect picture. She finally opened her purse when her phone buzzed again. 3 unread messages sat on the screen, all from First Commonwealth Bank. The first said, "Ms. Miller, final verification is complete." The second said, "Incoming wire has posted." The third made the room seem to tilt beneath her feet. "Transfer completed. Available balance updated." Rachel stared at the number until the digits blurred. $40 million. Not a promise. Not a mistake she could blame on a tired mind. Not some legal phrase buried in a document. It was there in plain numbers, sitting inside an account with her name attached to it. Her thumb hovered over the screen while the party moved around her, laughter rising near the bar, glasses touching softly, Madison greeting Bradley's parents with both hands outstretched. Rachel heard none of it clearly. All she could hear was Henry's voice from years ago, patient and steady as he leaned under the hood of a neighbor's Buick, telling her that the world often hides the most important things in plain sight because most people never look closely enough. She had thought he meant engines. She had thought he meant people. She had never imagined he meant himself. Just after noon that day, before leaving for the hotel, Rachel had received a call from a woman named Elaine Porter, a senior officer at First Commonwealth. Elaine had spoken with the careful calm of someone trained to deliver life-changing information without shaking the person receiving it. There was a trust. There were private investments. There had been instructions from Henry Miller, signed years before his passing, to release certain funds once all probate matters were complete. Rachel had listened in her small kitchen, one hand gripping the counter, looking out at the old Ford parked under the maple tree. "Your father was a very disciplined man," Elaine had said. "He wanted this handled quietly." Quietly. That word had followed Rachel all afternoon. Henry had lived quietly. Saved quietly. Helped quietly. Built something quietly while everyone else mistook silence for failure. Rachel locked her phone and slipped it back into her purse, her heart still beating hard but her face calm. Across the room, Aunt Patricia had begun introducing Madison to an older man in a navy suit, and Rachel heard her say, "Our family has always believed in proper presentation." Then Patricia glanced toward Rachel, just long enough to make the meaning clear. Rachel looked down at the keys in her hand. The brass keyring was scratched almost smooth from Henry's fingers, and beside it hung a tiny metal tag from Miller Auto Repair. She closed her hand around it again, not because she needed courage, but because she suddenly understood that her father had left her more than money. He had left her the patience to watch people reveal themselves before she revealed anything at all. By the time the dinner doors opened, Rachel had already learned that wealth had its own weather. It warmed the people who were invited to stand in the center, and chilled the people expected to remain near the walls. Madison took Bradley Whitaker's arm beneath the ballroom archway while a photographer called for family to gather near the floral backdrop. Aunt Patricia waved Rachel forward for half a second, then seemed to reconsider when she noticed the old leather purse in Rachel's hand and the plain navy dress that did not sparkle beneath the lights. "Maybe after the main family photos," Patricia said softly, touching Rachel's elbow as if moving her only an inch made the exclusion gentler. Rachel nodded and stepped back, watching cousins, uncles, and future in-laws arrange themselves around Madison like ornaments around a tree. She did not feel invisible. That would have been easier. She felt displayed in the wrong way, kept close enough for people to recognize her, but far enough for them to deny responsibility for how she was treated. When everyone finally moved to their assigned tables, Rachel found her place near the back beside an elderly neighbor she had never met, and a junior accountant from Bradley's firm who spent most of the meal checking messages under the table. At the front, Madison laughed brightly while Bradley's father spoke about legacy, reputation, and the importance of joining families with shared values. Rachel listened politely, though every sentence seemed built from the same polished stone. Shared values. Proper presentation. Good breeding. The kind of phrases that sounded graceful until someone used them to measure another human being. Then Uncle Grant stood to give a toast. He was Patricia's younger brother. Broad-shouldered, red-faced from expensive wine, and confident in the way men became when they believed every room belonged to them. "I have watched Madison grow into the kind of woman this family can be proud of," he began, raising his glass. The room smiled. Madison lowered her eyes and practiced modesty. "She has always understood the importance of standards. And believe me, in this family, we have seen all kinds of standards." A few people chuckled before they even knew where the joke was going. Rachel felt it approaching like a car taking a corner too fast. Grant turned his head towards the back of the ballroom. "Some of us arrive in German engineering," he said, lifting his glass toward Bradley's father. "Some of us arrive in museum pieces that should probably have their own historical marker out front." Laughter scattered across the room, first nervous, then louder when people realized Rachel was not going to defend herself. Madison pressed her napkin to her mouth, hiding a smile badly. Patricia tilted her head as if embarrassed for Rachel, not by Grant. Rachel sat still, her hands folded in her lap, Henry's truck keys resting beneath her fingers like a quiet anchor. Grant continued, pleased with himself. But that is family, is it not? We all come from somewhere. Some of us just come with a little more rust. The laughter came again, and this time it had teeth. Rachel looked down at her water glass and saw the chandelier reflected on the surface, trembling slightly though her hand was steady. She thought of Henry washing that truck every Sunday even after the paint faded, checking the tire pressure before every long drive, teaching her how to listen to an engine before deciding what was wrong. He had never been ashamed of repair. He had believed broken things deserved patience before judgment. Across the room, Madison stood and lifted her own glass. Rachel, you know we love you, she said, her voice sweet enough to pass as kindness for anyone not paying attention. And after the wedding, if you ever want something more stable, I am sure Bradley and I could find a small office position for you. Something simple. Something with benefits. The room softened into approving smiles, as if Madison had just offered charity instead of humiliation wrapped in satin. Rachel raised her eyes to meet her cousin's. For the first time that evening, Madison looked uncertain. Not afraid, not yet, but aware that Rachel's silence was not weakness. Rachel smiled gently, not wide enough to forgive, not cold enough to reveal what was coming. That is very thoughtful, she said. But I think my situation may be changing. The room did not know what to do with Rachel's answer. It was too calm to challenge, and too strange to ignore. Madison lowered her glass first, then gave a small laugh, hoping the others would follow her back into comfort. Well, change can be good, she said lightly. Especially when it comes with a better car. A few people laughed again, but the sound had lost its confidence. Rachel did not laugh with them. She simply reached for her purse and felt the corner of the old envelope inside, the one she had found that morning in the glove compartment of Henry's truck. It had been tucked behind a stack of faded registration papers, folded neatly as if her father had expected her fingers to find it one day. The envelope was yellowed at the edges, sealed but not forgotten, with her name written across the front in Henry's careful block letters. Rachel had almost left it in the truck, afraid that opening one more piece of her father's past would make the day heavier than it already was. But something about the bank call, the wire transfer, and the timing of it all had made her slip it into her purse before driving to the hotel. Now, while the ballroom pretended to move on from Uncle Grant's joke, Rachel ran her thumb over the envelope flap beneath the table. Madison began speaking again at the front, thanking Bradley's family, thanking the hotel staff, thanking everyone who had shown up in a way that reflected the importance of the evening. Rachel heard the phrase and almost admired how naturally her cousin could turn a compliment into offense. She looked down, carefully opened her purse, and slid the envelope onto her lap where the white tablecloth hid it from the room. Inside was a smaller folded note, a safe deposit key taped to thick paper, and a line written in the same hand that had signed every birthday card she had ever saved. Do not let them make you ashamed of what brought you here. Rachel read it once, then again, while the noise around her faded into something distant. Beneath the sentence was another note. First Commonwealth Bank. Box 417. Elaine Porter will know what to do. Rachel's breath caught, but her face did not change. That was Henry's final lesson, hidden not in a lawyer's office or behind a marble desk, but in the old truck everyone had mocked before dessert had even been served. He had placed the beginning of her future in the one place only she would respect enough to search. The safe deposit key was small, brass, and scratched along one edge, not impressive in any way. Yet it felt heavier than every crystal glass and gold watch in that ballroom. Rachel folded the note carefully and tucked it back into the envelope. Across the room, Aunt Patricia was leaning toward another guest, speaking with a sympathetic tilt of her head. Rachel could not hear every word, but she caught enough. Henry was a sweet man, but not practical. Rachel gets that from him. Sentimental to a fault. Rachel looked toward her aunt without anger. For years, she had believed those comments were meant to make her feel small. Now she understood they were evidence. These people had stood close to Henry Miller and never seen him. They had taken his quiet for emptiness, his work clothes for failure, his modest house for lack of ambition. They had mistaken the absence of performance for the absence of power. Rachel slipped the envelope back into her purse just as a hotel employee approached Madison and whispered something in her ear. Madison's bright expression tightened. She looked toward the ballroom entrance, then toward Rachel, confused for a reason she did not yet understand. A moment later, the employee crossed the room and stopped beside Rachel's table. "Ms. Miller," he said respectfully, bending slightly so his voice would not carry too far. "There are 2 people here asking for you from First Commonwealth Bank. They said it is urgent and that they were instructed to meet you personally." The junior accountant beside Rachel finally looked up from his phone. Aunt Patricia stopped mid-sentence. Madison stared from the front of the room, her smile disappearing 1 inch at a time. Rachel closed her hand around Henry's truck keys, stood slowly, and said, "Please show them in." The ballroom entrance opened with the quiet weight of something official, and 2 people stepped inside as if they had not come to attend a party but to correct a record. The first was Elaine Porter, the senior officer from First Commonwealth Bank, a composed woman in a dark gray suit carrying a leather portfolio against her side. Beside her walked an older man with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the measured calm of someone who had spent his life reading documents before other people understood their importance. The hotel employee guided them straight toward Rachel, and with every step they took, the room became less interested in Madison's flowers, Bradley's family, and the untouched slices of cake waiting near the far wall. Conversations faded. Forks rested against plates. Madison stood frozen near the front table, still holding her glass, while Aunt Patricia stared at Elaine as though a bank officer had wandered into the wrong life. Elaine stopped beside Rachel and offered her hand with professional warmth. "Miss Miller, thank you for allowing us to come in. I apologize for interrupting your evening, but your father's instructions were very specific about personal confirmation once the transfer posted." The word transfer moved through the room like a draft under a closed door. Rachel shook Elaine's hand and felt the room watching every inch of her. "I understand," Rachel said. Her voice sounded steady, though her heart was moving fast. The older man opened a slim folder. "My name is Thomas Caldwell. I served as legal counsel for Henry Miller's private trust for many years." A small sound rose from Aunt Patricia's table, almost a laugh, almost a cough, as if the idea of Henry having private counsel was too absurd for her to swallow. Thomas did not look at her. "Your father directed that certain information be delivered to you only after the final wire cleared and only in person. That condition has now been met." Elaine placed the leather portfolio on the table in front of Rachel, opened it, and turned the first page so Rachel could see her own name printed at the top. "As of this afternoon, the liquid portion of the Miller Legacy Trust has been transferred into your account. The posted amount is $40 million. The silence that followed was so complete that Rachel could hear the faint hum of the ballroom lights. The junior accountant beside her slowly set down his phone. Uncle Grant's face lost its color in stages. Madison's lips parted, but no words came out. Elaine continued, respectful but clear. "That amount does not include the remaining trust assets, which consist of investment holdings, mineral rights, and commercial property interests." Thomas turned another page. "One of those property interests may be familiar to some members of this room. The east parcel on Whitaker Crossing, currently leased by Grant Whitaker Holdings, was purchased by your father through a limited liability company 17 years ago. Upon his passing, controlling authority transferred to you." Rachel looked from the paper to Uncle Grant, whose hand had tightened around the stem of his glass. The same man who had joked about rust had been paying rent, indirectly, to the man he dismissed as impractical. Madison took one small step backward, as if distance could soften the truth. Aunt Patricia whispered, "That cannot be right." Thomas finally looked toward her, not unkindly, but without yielding an inch. "The documents are complete, the signatures are valid, and the bank has verified the transfer." Rachel lowered her eyes to the portfolio. There was Henry's name, written not as a memory but as proof. Henry Miller, who ate lunch from a paper bag, who fixed old engines until his knuckles ached, who let people underestimate him because he had no need to perform for them. He had not been hiding wealth out of shame. He had been protecting peace. Rachel touched the edge of the page gently, then looked up at Elaine. "My father wanted this quiet," she said. Elaine nodded. "Yes. Until people needed to know who they were speaking." 2. Across the ballroom, no one laughed at the old truck anymore. For several seconds nobody moved because the truth had not simply entered the ballroom. It had taken the best seat in the room. Rachel stood beside the table with Elaine Porter and Thomas Caldwell, the leather portfolio open before her, while every person who had laughed only minutes earlier seemed to search for a safer version of themselves. Uncle Grant was the first to try. He cleared his throat, adjusted his jacket, and smiled with a softness Rachel had never seen on his face. "Well," he said, his voice too loud in the quiet room. "Henry always was full of surprises." Rachel looked at him and remembered all the times he had called her father a decent mechanic, as if decent were the ceiling of a man's life. She remembered him handing Henry keys at family gatherings without looking him in the eye, asking if he could take a quick listen to a noise under the hood, then returning to conversations with men he considered more important. Now Grant's smile stretched wider, trying to cover years in a single expression. "Your dad and I had a lot of respect between us," he added. The lie landed gently, but it still landed. Aunt Patricia stood next, smoothing her dress as if wrinkles were the real emergency. "Rachel, sweetheart," she said, walking toward her with both hands lifted. "You must be overwhelmed. Why do you not come sit with us at the family table? You should not be all the way back here." Rachel glanced toward the front table, where her name had never been placed. There was no chair waiting for her there, only space being invented after money had made her visible. Madison came down from the head table slower than the others, her face arranged into sympathy, but her eyes were bright with calculation. "I had no idea," she said softly. "You should have told me what you were dealing with. I would have made sure tonight felt different for you." Rachel held Madison's gaze. That was the most painful sentence of the evening, because Madison almost believed it. She truly thought mistreatment required missing information, not missing character. Bradley hovered behind her, suddenly attentive, suddenly polite. "Miss Miller," he said, offering a formal nod that felt borrowed from Elaine's respect. "Your father sounds like he was an extraordinary man." Rachel wanted to ask where that opinion had been when the room laughed at rust and museum pieces. Instead, she looked at the guests around them. Some avoided her eyes. Some smiled too warmly. Some whispered into their napkins, already rewriting the story in real time, preparing to say they had always known Henry was special, always admired Rachel's loyalty, always believed quiet people could surprise you. Thomas Caldwell closed the folder with deliberate care. "There will be several documents requiring your signature, but they can be reviewed privately at your convenience," he said. Elaine added, "Your father emphasized that you were not to be pressured tonight." The word pressured changed the air again. Grant's smile faltered. Patricia's hands lowered. Madison blinked, as if the bank had just built a wall between Rachel and everyone rushing toward her. Rachel felt something settle inside her, not pride, not revenge, but clarity. She had spent years wondering whether she was too sensitive, whether the little comments, the side entrances, the charity disguised as advice, and the laughter wrapped in manners were truly as cruel as they felt. Now she knew. They had not misunderstood her. They had measured her, found no immediate advantage, and placed her near the back. The only thing that changed was the number attached to her name. Madison reached for Rachel's arm the same way she had done outside, but this time Rachel stepped back before her fingers touched. The movement was small, polite, and final. "Please do not worry about changing the seating," Rachel said. "I have already learned everything I needed to know from where you placed me." Madison's face tightened, and for once she had no elegant reply. Across the ballroom, the flowers still looked perfect, the chandeliers still shone, and the band began playing again because nobody knew how to handle silence that expensive. Rachel picked up Henry's envelope, placed it carefully inside her purse, and stood beside the people who had come to honor his instructions. Not the people who had waited to honor his money. Rachel did not leave the ballroom immediately, and that seemed to confuse everyone more than if she had stormed out. She stayed exactly where she was, calm beneath the chandeliers, while Elaine Porter and Thomas Caldwell guided her through the first documents with the careful patience Henry had requested for her. Uncle Grant remained close enough to listen without appearing to listen, and Aunt Patricia hovered nearby with a wounded expression, as if Rachel's inheritance had somehow been rude to her personally. Madison tried twice to restart the celebration, but the room no longer obeyed her. The flowers were still expensive, the music was still soft, and the table settings still gleamed beneath the golden lights, but the center of gravity had moved. It was no longer Madison's perfect evening. It was the night every polished person in that ballroom realized they had mistaken a quiet woman for someone they could safely dismiss. Thomas slid one document forward and spoke in a low voice meant only for Rachel. "This confirms your authority over the commercial parcel at Whitaker Crossing. The lease review period opens Monday morning. Your father left notes regarding that property." Rachel looked at the page, then at Uncle Grant, whose smile returned too quickly. "Rachel," he said, stepping closer, "we should talk about that later as family. No need to mix business with a happy occasion." The same man who had mixed mockery into a toast now wanted boundaries. Rachel did not raise her voice. "My father mixed business with Patience for 17 years, she said. "I think I can take one evening to understand what he protected." Grant swallowed and looked toward Patricia, but Patricia was suddenly very interested in her bracelet. Elaine opened a second folder. "There is also a handwritten directive from your father regarding charitable distributions, pending your approval. He suggested a scholarship fund for vocational students, especially those entering automotive repair, welding, electrical work, and small business ownership." Rachel felt her chest tighten in a way no insult had managed all evening. That sounded like Henry. Not marble buildings. Not his name carved where wealthy people could admire it. A real door opened for real people who knew how to work with their hands. He wanted it called the Miller Work and Dignity Fund, Thomas added. Rachel pressed her fingertips lightly against the paper. She could see her father in his garage, standing beneath fluorescent lights, teaching teenagers from the neighborhood how to change oil, balance a tire, read an invoice, and speak honestly to a customer. He had never cared whether the world clapped for him. He only cared whether someone left stronger than they arrived. Madison stepped closer, her voice careful and soft. "That is beautiful, Rachel. Truly. Maybe after the wedding, Bradley and I could help announce it. It would look wonderful for both families." There it was again, the instinct to take something sacred and polish it for display. Rachel turned to her cousin. "No," she said, not sharply, but with enough finality that Madison stopped breathing for a second. "This will not be used as decoration for anyone's image." Madison's face flushed. "I was only trying to support you. You were trying to place yourself beside something you did not respect until tonight," Rachel said. The words were quiet, but they crossed the table cleanly. A few guests looked down at their plates. Bradley shifted uncomfortably behind Madison. Rachel turned back to Thomas. "About the Whitaker Crossing lease," she said. "My father left notes." Thomas nodded and removed a single page from the folder. "He documented years of delayed maintenance requests from small tenants on the parcel and concerns about wage practices among contracted staff. He did not act earlier because he wanted you to make the final decision when the trust transferred." Grant's face hardened, then softened when he remembered who now held the authority. "Rachel, those are complicated matters. Then we will handle them carefully," Rachel said. "The lease can be reviewed, but any renewal will require fair treatment of workers, timely repairs for small tenants, and full transparency. If that is too difficult, the land can serve a better purpose." For the first time all evening, Rachel felt no need to explain herself further. She signed only the acknowledgement forms Elaine recommended for that night, leaving the larger decisions for a clear morning. She was not there to perform revenge. She was there to inherit responsibility. When the pen left the page, she looked toward the ballroom entrance, and thought of the old blue Ford waiting outside under hotel lights it had never asked to deserve. They had laughed when it arrived. But that truck had carried Henry's secret, Rachel's loyalty, and the key to a future no one in that room had been rich enough to recognize. Rachel finished the last signature Elaine recommended for that evening, then closed the pen and placed it gently beside the folder. Nothing about the motion was dramatic, yet half the ballroom watched as if she had just changed the future of everyone standing under those chandeliers. In a way, she had. Uncle Grant looked like a man trying to calculate kindness backward. Aunt Patricia kept touching her pearls, her mouth opening once, then closing again when no graceful sentence came to save her. Madison stood near the front table in her champagne-colored dress, surrounded by flowers she had chosen to impress people who were now staring past her. Rachel did not feel triumph when she looked at them. Triumph would have been too loud, too cheap, too similar to the laughter they had spent so freely. What she felt was release. Years of small comments, side glances, careful exclusions, and charity offered like a leash finally loosened around her chest. She picked up Henry's envelope, tucked it safely into her purse, and turned to Elaine and Thomas. "Thank you for coming here," she said. Thomas nodded. "Your father wanted you to have witnesses when the truth arrived." Rachel looked toward the ballroom entrance. "He always did no timing." For the first time that night, her voice almost broke, not from embarrassment, but from missing him. Elaine gave her a quiet smile and said, "He spoke of you with great pride." That sentence stayed with Rachel as she walked toward the exit. The room seemed to part for her, not openly, not with announcement, but with the instinctive movement people make when they realize someone they underestimated has been carrying more than they knew. Madison stepped forward before Rachel reached the archway. "Rachel, please," she said softly. "Can we talk tomorrow? Just us?" Rachel stopped, but she did not turn fully back into the room. "We can talk when you are ready to talk about what happened before the money," she said. Madison's eyes filled with something close to shame, but Rachel had learned not to mistake discomfort for change. "I did not mean for tonight to hurt you," Madison whispered. Rachel looked at her cousin, remembering the side entrance, the hidden seating, the joke dressed up as a toast. "No," Rachel said. "You just expected me to accept it quietly." Then she walked on. Outside, the night air felt clean and cool against her face. The red carpet was still there. The white columns still rose above the hotel doors. But at the curb, beneath the golden valet lights, Henry's old blue Ford waited with its faded paint, dented fender, and toolbox in the bed. The same young valet who had told her it could not stay there now stood beside it with both hands around the keys, his posture stiff with regret. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice careful, "I am sorry about earlier. I did not know." Rachel accepted the keys and looked at the truck. "Most people did not," she said. "That was never the truck's fault." He opened the driver's door for her, and this time no one laughed. Guests had gathered near the entrance, some pretending to wait for rides, others simply watching the old pickup as if it had become rare in the space of one evening. Aunt Patricia stood behind the glass doors. Uncle Grant looked away when Rachel glanced in his direction. Madison remained on the steps, small beneath the hotel lights, holding the silence she had once handed to Rachel. Rachel climbed into the cab and rested her hand on the cracked steering wheel. The familiar scent of vinyl, dust, and motor oil wrapped around her like a memory that still knew her name. She placed Henry's envelope on the passenger seat, beside the old leather purse they had all judged too quickly, and started the engine. It rumbled low and uneven for a second, then settled into the sound she had known since childhood. Before pulling away, Rachel looked at the little silver cross hanging from the mirror and smiled through the ache in her chest. $40 million had changed the way everyone else saw her, but it had not changed the road that brought her there. Henry had known that. He had left her money, land, and authority, but more than anything, he had left her proof that dignity did not need applause to be real. Rachel drove away from the Harrington Grand Hotel in the same truck they had mocked, past the expensive cars lined up along the curb, past the people who had learned too late that rust was not the same thing as worthlessness. And for the first time all night, she did not feel placed near the back of anyone's life. She felt free.